Hey everybody, it's Fang here again with this week's Design Cinema, episode 23 called The Siege. This is going to be more of a fantasy-based painting, whereas last week we did a lot of sci-fi type of things. I thought I'll switch it up this week and do something more of along the lines of those epic battles that you see so many times in these films, such as Lord of the Rings, or a lot of video games have this kind of thing where thousands of troops are marching against either other troops or some kind of castle. In this case, we're going to have a battle scene where troops are marching against a castle. The approach here is very similar to last week, where right now I'm scratching up the canvas and establishing the value. This painting is a little longer than last week's. This one took about 4.5 hours to complete in real time. You are watching it highly compressed, obviously, because it's still 30 minutes on YouTube. So quite a bit of speed up. And also, I'm going to plan this drawing out a little bit more than last week's, where if you watch last week's episode, I drew the design as we painted, basically as a painting. Whereas right now, you can see here, I am sketching out what the battle scene will look like. But keep in mind, the line drawing is very loose. The purpose of the line drawing is not to get my all the details down, but only purely as a volume forming thing, right? It's like if you filled it with water, how much water would this thing take up? That's all it's doing. So I'm not really going there and designing anything. It's just holding up the space. So that way I can balance the composition and balance the painting. And I try to give it the line drawing as soon as I can when I go to paint. So that way you don't fall in love with the line drawing and start painting super tight. So you can see it's indicated there's some monsters holding weapons, there's a castle, and these monsters have some humans underneath them. You know, very simple layout. Again, just enough to hold the forms. So I tried different things, doesn't work, I delete it. And this one's on a layer, whereas the background is not on a layer at all. So this is not a layer. So that way I could remove it very easily. So there I made the layer very low opacity, about 10%, and I'll now start laying in the value. So line drawing you can see is very loose. It doesn't hold any kind of detail at all. That will come once we start painting. And this will keep the painting spontaneous, right? If I drew a very tight line drawing, the tendency is to render it more like maybe a comic book style or something like that, which is a little bit more tighter, where the line is super defined. In this one, I want a painterly feel, so I don't want the line drawing to be a distraction. I'm trying to keep this as fantasy as I can. Again, these are done in as I record, so they're a little bit different than the way I usually work. Which because when I'm painting this, I can't really mess around too much because it wastes time. Everything's being recorded. Or if I try this doesn't work, I can't just simply delete and start again because that'll make the videos extremely long. So there's tendency of a little bit of pressure while doing these. So I don't have that much time to figure out the design, right? Which usually I'll draw a couple passes with the thing looks like before I commit to it. In this case, it's pretty much whatever I design on the first round, I go with it. Right? There's a little bit of refinement as you can see here, but not much. But it's okay. I think the purpose of these demos are to more show the technique versus refinement of design. The topics of these are not really about design. So, but I try my best to keep it interesting, keep it fun, and not too generic. We're not going to copy Lord of the Rings or copy anything from whatever video games. But at the same time, we're trying to grasp that feeling you get when you see those type of scenarios taking place. So here now I'm blocking in the castle itself. Now the perspective of this is a little bit cheated. This is not true perspective here. This is more of an eyeballed perspective to tell a story. It's got a very fisheye lens going from right to left. You can see, right, got a very extreme perspective on the left, especially on this castle. Horizon is very low to the ground. So in reality, this is not possible to do. Maybe with the fisheye camera, you could get the left side, but the monsters on the right will also distort, which I'm not distorting on purpose. A painting like this would typically be used, for example, for a magazine layout where you have a pan shot with double page spread where you can have the logo on the left and perhaps the right could be some game screens or something like that on the bottom right. Or it could be used for editing in a video game department. You can actually throw this into Premiere or After Effects and the editor could actually pan within the shot. For example, pan from lower right to upper left, and that way the perspective helps tell the story. But as you look at it as a whole, it's actually technically not correct, but it does work. Because at the end of the day, it's about, does it make the feeling work? Do you get the feeling across to tell the story? Not everything has to be 100% technically correct. Obviously, the more you are to perfection, the easier it is for your reader to understand. But there are many ways to capture the same feeling without actually making sure that every single vanishing point or horizon line is matching up. All right. So at the end of the day, it's about, does your design work and does it feel right? The feeling part is quite important. Here I am just adding some secondary light source. So this castle here is on fire. And also underneath these monsters, there's going to be some lit fire. Because later, you'll see I'll add a weapon in between the two monsters. Some kind of giant cannon. And maybe that's producing the secondary light source. So no details at this stage. It's purely value building. So I zoom out quite a bit to check the values. Adjust it with the level adjuster. And once all the values are done, that's when I go in and actually start to paint. Even right now, I'm still not painting, still just adjusting the major forms. Think of the giant shapes, right? Don't worry about armor or weapons, those things will all come later. But you can see early on, this is only about, in real time, oh gosh, maybe half an hour, 35 minutes in, right, at this point. But the overall painting is actually already established. The mood, the lighting, the feeling, the overall design is actually done. And that's what I like to do in production. So imagine, again, if you're working in the art department, I mentioned this many times in the previous videos, someone could look at this painting and understand exactly what you are trying to do, versus you doing again, an eyeball or something like that, saying this is going to turn into this cool epic invasion painting with thousands of troops, but I can show you right now is an eyeball of a monster, but it's drawn really tight. Right, that doesn't really cut it during production. This is the kind of stuff we generally do, and most professionals all work this way. It's just how production works. We're not doing artwork here. We're making products, and when you make products, you have to be part of a pipeline, and that pipeline must be understood by everyone on the same project, basically. Starting to define the castle slightly. See what I'm doing here. So now I'm starting to add details finally, but still very rough. And I'm not using any layers at all. This painting had very little layers. Right now it's running at a resolution about 2390, to get a 2:3:5 ratio. And the final painting itself actually went to about 9,000, almost 10,000 pixels wide. So we slowly increase the canvas size as we add detail. Here I'm getting the eye, the face area out. Now horizon's low, so we're going to be looking up at these guys. We're going to see the inner mouth. We're going to see their belly. Same thing as looking up at the castle. We're going to see the bottom of the castle. Right. So even though the perspective has a little bit of cheat, we still want to follow the general form of perspective. And in this case, horizon's very, very low to the ground. We've got multiple light sources. We've got kind of overcast day, so it's going to get a little bit of general highlights across this back. And then we have this under bounce light coming from the fire, or secondary light source coming from below. Here are some soldiers getting marked in. And everything is indicated. That's one of the beauties of painting, is that what you're painting is actually just light, and the light could work in many different ways. It could bounce, it could reflect, it could indicate, and a painting sort of has that same thing. Right? You don't want to get in there and paint or define every single thing. It'll look too tight. Here's one of the soldiers, and the soldiers are going to repeat. What I'm trying to do here is paint one, sort of define one of them, and then the second ones will all repeat each other. So you don't have to paint every single soldier perfectly. Just like the monsters here, the one that's closest to camera is defined versus the one further away from us is just indicated. But the human eye will make a natural connection between the two, that you'll think the second one is just as finished because the first one you see is clear. And that's generally how the real world works as well. When you see one object, for example, in Africa, you see one elephant, you see the other ones kind of next to it. Even though your eye is not focused, you'll know that they're elephants too, and they're pretty much the same thing. So we use that to our advantage, mainly to save time and at the same time make the painting feel more natural. Because it would be very time consuming if we actually went in and painted both monsters to be the same tightness and every single soldier on the ground to have all the details. You can, of course, if the painting, if you had a week on this thing, sure, we could bring it to a very extreme high level of detail. But for quick painting like this, you're talking about under 4 hours here. You have to use little tricks to make it look finished without you actually committing all the time to make it finished. Right? Visual tricks.